Hello and welcome to the podcast that must not tell lies.
This is a spoiler-filled Harry Potter podcast from within the Department of Mysteries, where myself, Luke, and Alex are Unspeakables, and we are going to twist fan theories and magical theory to suit facts in J.K. Rowling's magical world of Harry Potter. Today's theme, we're going to start a series on the life and lies of Albus Dumbledore. Alex, what topic are we talking about?
The topic we're talking about today is that Albus defeated Grindelwald because he killed Ariana. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to that, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to be touching on a lot of other theories that will require supporting episodes on our part to kind of unravel as we go. So let's take a look at the Reddit thread that kind of kicked us off on this topic. Do you want to start reading off what we have there?
Sure. So we're looking at a Reddit thread started by a poster named Shazzy McGee. And this post was submitted on 29 September 2017, right around the time that, there's a lot of discussion going on still about the Fantastic Beasts movie. And this sort of comes out of that. But let's just go through. I'll give the theory a read through, and we'll move forward. So here's a theory coming from Shaz McGee. Now, we don't know if he or she originated this theory or if it came from somewhere else, originally. But this is the one we found, so we're giving credit to Shaz McGee. Now, the reason Grindelwald is so interested in controlling an Obscurus is because he was overpowered by Ariana. So that harkens back to the Fantastic Beasts movie, obviously. So the theory started is Ariana is an Obscurus, and during the fight that ultimately led to her death, she was able to overpower Grindelwald and take his wand from him, perhaps in her confused attempt to save Aberforth from the Cruciatus curse. In the fight, it was Albus that killed her, which is why he was later able to defeat Grindelwald. This timeline means that Grindelwald had the Elder Wand before going to Godric's Hollow and meeting Albus. There would have been time because Aberforth says that he was about to go back to school after they had known each other a few weeks. This means that Grindelwald was doing something else at the beginning of the summer after leaving Durmstrang, researching and stealing the wand. He was already aware of the Hallows before meeting Albus, so this is possible. During the fight, the Elder Wand's allegiance shifted to Ariana and then to Albus. This is why Albus took so long to fight Grindelwald. He knew that it would confirm that it was he who had killed Ariana. It did, and he lived with that for the rest of his life.
It's definitely a pretty interesting theory. A lot of, like we said, a lot of other parts play into this. Is Ariana an Obscurial or an Obscurus? A lot of wand allegiance lore questions kind of being brought into it, and also just overall timeline of Albus Dumbledore's life and Grindelwald's life and how they intertwined. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Fantastic Beasts movies that are not out yet may reflect some of this and give us more information as we continue forward.
Right. I mean, this is definitely a theory. I think at least parts of this will either be confirmed or debunked by the coming Fantastic Beasts movie. So that'll be interesting to see that play out. But overall, it's a theory that kind of spoke to me because it really fits. I mean, there's going to be some pieces that we kind of pick at, but it just feels right to me, And maybe we start with the piece with Ariana being Obscurus. Now, maybe that deserves its own episode, maybe not. But to me, I think that's what they were going for. I mean, I think they almost, when they designed the Obscurus to use in Fantastic Beast, I think they, and by they I mean mostly J.K. Rowling, obviously, but they reached back and thought about Ariana and kind of drew some parallels there to form the idea of the Obscurus. I mean, that's obviously my personal opinion, but it just seems like that's where they're going with this.
Yeah, definitely. Credence, the young boy in Fantastic Beasts who turns into an Obscurial, or is an Obscurial throughout the entire movie. It definitely has a lot of similarities of, and I guess let's give a real quick definition of what an Obscurus is. Just pull it up real quick. And they do a good job really explaining it in the Fantastic Beasts movie, but from harrypotter.wikia.com, An Obscurus was the manifestation of the repressed energy of a magical child, known as an Obscurial. Described as a dark and parasitic force, an Obscurus was created when the child in question was forced to repress their talents through physical or psychological abuse. This energy can manifest itself as a separate entity that can erupt in violent, destructive fury. So it's when the magical talents of a child are repressed and forced to be internalized that it ends up kind of exploding out in this fury of magical energy. And we know that Ariana ended up having something that looks a lot like this, and that's what killed Kendra Dumbledore, Albus's mother. And it seems as though this all stems from whenever Percival Dumbledore, her father, that whole incident where he attacked the 3 Muggle boys after she was seen doing some magic in the backyard when she was very young and couldn't reproduce because she was untrained. So after that, it seems like she would have internalized a lot of this and repressed herself from doing magic, which is why a lot of people thought that she was a squib.
Right. So, I think for the purpose of our discussion, we go forward kind of assuming that that's the case. I mean, it just seems too airtight to really even need to carry on further discussion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm all on board with Ariana is an Obscurial. So, with that, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of this episode, Alex, what is your likelihood ranking 1 out of 7 for this theory that Albus defeated Grindelwald because he was responsible for killing Ariana?
So, my initial likelihood rating was I'm going with a 5 on this one. It just feels right to me. I don't know, it just feels like it fits. It fits with the pictures were painted of Dumbledore and his personality, and we know that he struggles with his sister's death, and I think a lot of people ask why it took him so long to fight Grindelwald, and this theory kind of wraps that up into a nice package. So I like it a lot. So I start out with a 5.
I agree. I'm also going to give it a 5 out of 7 on the likelihood. It, on the surface, feels very good. Kind of like you were saying, it wraps up a lot of different theories and a lot of different pieces of information and questions that are outstanding after books 6 and 7 specifically, and ties in new information from the Fantastic Beasts movie, which that whole series is still going on. So I give it a 5, but we'll revisit this once we finish discussing it and see if we've adjusted our ratings here. So, with that, you want to get started?
Let's get started.
All right. So, I think the chapters that really provide the most information about this topic are going to be 1 from book 6, The Cave, where Harry and Dumbledore go to the cave, and Dumbledore drinks the potion to get the Horcrux out. We see him reacting very negatively to what he's seeing, and we find out later that it's most likely him having difficulties with the whole Ariana being dead thing. Book 7, we start getting information about the life and lives of Albus Dumbledore at the wedding from Aunt Muriel. And then the chapter, The Life and Lives of Albus Dumbledore. There's plenty of spots where this all gets touched on. We get it when we're talking to Aberforth for the first time in the Hog's Head towards the end of, right before the Battle of Hogwarts. And also at King's Cross in the Harry's dead scene. So there's a lot of different places that this kind of pulls from to start piecing this together, not to mention the entire book 7 of learning about wand allegiance. So it's kind of hard to pick one place where this is kind of coming from. It's essentially all of books 6 and 7 where we really learn about Albus, young Albus. So with that, let's maybe go line by line and...
Yeah, I don't know. Let's just look at it. Go through it line by line. I think that's a decent idea. So we've already kind of taken the stance that we agree Ariana definitely could be, if not is, an Obscurus, or has that going on inside her. would she be able to overpower Grindelwald? Well, based on what we saw in the Fantastic Beasts movie, she would have been able to. I mean, that would have been set before the Fantastic Beasts movie, so obviously if he's able to be overpowered at that time, he could have been overpowered during this fight. So, no real issue with that portion. Taking his wand from him, again, that's, definitely something that would be within the power.
And once he is disarmed, the next line it says in the fight, it was Albus that killed her, which makes a lot of sense, because I don't know if Aberforth would have been powerful enough. We don't have a whole lot of information on how talented he really was, but we know that Albus probably was powerful enough to be the one to kind of strike that killing blow, almost, just to put down the threat that Ariana was, as she was transformed into. Kind of like an abomination is a little bit how I perceive the obscurial idea. So it makes a lot of sense that it was Albus that did it. Aberforth does go on to say that he was the one that was always able to calm her down, but I don't know if that applies when she's already kind of this transformed being. I don't know if there's much reasoning with it. We've seen in the Fantastic Beasts movie that they are able to do that a little bit, which ends up killing Credence. But there's a lot more going on with that whole scene as well.
I definitely think that, and a lot of people point out that, if he's disarmed, then obviously it would have to be Dumbledore that killed Ariana. The way I picture this disarming is more of a temporary, kind of a quick thing that happens, like, some of the other disarmings that we see later in the book, in the books, it can happen really quick. And then, that person could retake physical possession of the wand.
Right. It doesn't mean it has the wand allegiance at that point.
Right. So within a short span, the wand allegiance could change because of that overpowering, and then not change back because it could just be a physical possession of the wand, not really, an overpowering that allowed Grindelwald to reclaim the wand. So I don't think that's a real hole in the story or in the theory whatsoever. We talk about timeline a little bit, and this is one of the maybe the larger holes in this theory, is that, later on, Dumbledore has a line that implies that Grindelwald found the wand after they were associated. And I think we've got that in here. So in the King's Cross chapter in Book 7, he says, "Years passed. There were rumors about him. They said he had procured a wand of immense power. I, meanwhile, was offered the post of Minister of Magic, not once, but several times." So that's just kind of a piece where he mentions it, and it kind of implies that he procured the wand of immense power after they had met. Yeah, Dumbledore implies that he got this wand after they kind of were associated later on, after years had passed. But, there's plenty of ways around that particular line. Dumbledore, he could have not realized that Grindelwald had the wand at the time of their duel over that involved Ariana. He could be kind of twisting the facts just a little bit to kind of to hide what really happened from Harry, as he does several times throughout the book for different reasons. There's not a real reason for him to do that here. He could have just left that part out. But, I don't feel like that statement necessarily means this theory is completely untrue.
Sure, it might be a small hole in the ship, but I don't think it's sinking it necessarily.
Right, yeah, I agree with that. Does it make it a little less likely? Would it be more ironclad without that statement? Yeah. But, our reliance on Dumbledore for straight facts, we can't take that to the bank.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that one of the initial assumptions is at that King's Cross, scene with Harry and Dumbledore, that Dumbledore's kind of laying it all on the line. So that's what it feels like, but that still doesn't mean that, well, one, the question of, is that really Dumbledore? Like, that's a whole different topic. Just right. Understating that scene it's all in Harry's head. So does that really count as Dumbledore? That's a whole different topic, I think. But we're supposed to understand that Harry is getting the full story from Dumbledore, at least the honest Dumbledore at this point. But I don't know if that's necessarily true, even if it is the real Dumbledore in that scene, because it's such after the whole scene with Grindelwald and Aberforth and Ariana, we know that Dumbledore doesn't trust anybody. He doesn't do that at all. He maybe trusts Snape a little bit, but still withholds things from him. It's a part of his nature at that point. It's fundamentally who he is to withhold information and not share everything. So, yeah, we're getting more from him in the King's Cross scene, but potentially still not everything. So I agree. It's definitely a good question about it. You know, there's an opportunity that Albus just didn't know, and that Grindelwald was pulling one over on him, that he already had the Elder Wand, but didn't tell, Albus about that necessarily. Another idea that I have on that issue is the timeline of the wand allegiance, regardless of when Grindelwald procured the wand itself, the Elder Wand from Grigorovich. And we don't necessarily know that if Grindelwald was overpowered by Ariana, that even future wands that Grindelwald has don't somehow postscript or posthumously draw their allegiance back to the wizard that overpowered him in the past, kind of thing. I know it's not a full-fledged idea, but there could be some, because wand lore is mind-boggling. There's a lot of really weird intricacies with it, I think, that we just never get information about. But there's nothing saying that even if Grindelwald didn't have the wand at that time, that when he gets it later, its allegiance still draws back to Ariana somehow.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's not something that I had thought about, but that's a good point to point out.
And so with that, whenever Albus kills Ariana, that wand allegiance then goes to him. So even when Grindelwald procures the Elder Wand later on, the allegiance is then back to Albus still. So it's definitely nothing supporting it, but there's so many questions I have about the whole wand lore issue and wand allegiance that I think it's a plausible path of logic.
Yeah, and one other thing to point out, we do get Harry's vision via Voldemort later on of Grindelwald stealing the wand from Grigorovich very young. I mean, it makes it very clear. Albus is talking about years passing, him getting a wand. Well, couldn't have been that many years because, as Harry points out in his description, he's very, very young that stole the wand. So, that's something to keep in mind as well.
Right, and it's the picture of Grindelwald and Albus in The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore by Rita Skeeter that Hermione shows to Harry, and he looks identical. That picture that's taken when they're together for just a few weeks, the image that Harry sees in Voldemort's memory, or when he's doing legilimens on Grigorovich, or on Grindelwald, I guess. No, it's on Grigorovich, and it's identical. So it makes you think that the timeline, they're pretty close to matching up there. Kind of along with all of that, the part that I was talking about a little bit ago about the wand allegiance questions, it feels a lot like Malfoy and Voldemort, like who has allegiance earlier, and even though it's Voldemort that takes the wand from Albus Dumbledore, similar to what you had discussed earlier, just possession is not gaining the allegiance necessarily. But so what we're led to believe, if we're going to follow that Dumbledore was accurate, that Gellert Grindelwald didn't have the Elder Wand at the time that they were kind of hanging out for those weeks in Godric's Hollow, that Grindelwald set out almost immediately after that to go searching for the Hollows, and that's when he would have maybe gone and stole it from Grigorovich. Yeah, that's definitely a more plausible, I think, option than Grindelwald having it before he gets to Albus, but we also know that Grindelwald was expelled from Durmstrang the spring before he and Albus were together in Godric's Hollow, so he would have had some time, and he was already very aware of the Deathly Hallows. He had already made that his sign. He had already been posting that on the walls at Durmstrang, which we hear from Victor Crumb. So he's already very aware of that and very easily could have tracked down Grigorovich, who shouldn't have been that hard to find. He's a pretty famous wand maker, so that's a pretty good logical place for him to start.
I mean, Grigorovich has been spreading the rumor, right? I mean,
right,
that he's trying to apply and spread that rumor. And basically all the Durmstrang students already get their wands there anyway,
Right.
According to Crumb in book 4. So obviously that's where you're going to go to look for it. I mean, it's not going to take him very, very long to plan that heist out. I mean, that's
right. Easily something he could have just, well, now that I'm expelled, let's go ahead and get that wand. Like, let's go check that out and then go end up in England. And that's when he meets Albus. So he very easily could have gotten the wand before that. Makes a lot of sense to me. And easily could have been withholding that information from Albus at the same time. He might be, because we know that Albus cared for Grindelwald pretty hard. He seems to have a crush on him. They got along really well. That doesn't mean that Grindelwald had the same types of feelings. It doesn't mean that he was so enamored in reverse, other than trying to use Albus Dumbledore. We already know from what we've learned of, what's his name? Graves, which is Grindelwald in the Fantastic Beasts movie, that's like exactly what he does. He uses people. He gets what he needs from people. And Albus is a pretty good resource for young Gellert Grindelwald to learn more about the Hollows. And he most likely wouldn't tell him. Grindelwald most likely wouldn't tell Albus that, hey, I've already got one of these. He's got that in his back pocket of, well, let's see if he can help me find the other two. Is how I'm viewing it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that kind of extends this theory a little bit, that their whole relationship was based on Grindelwald exploiting his talents to leveraging his talents to find the other two Horcruxes, right. The other two Hallows. Hallows or Horcruxes?
It's a good question.
The wrong one there. but exploiting him to and his feelings for Grindelwald to find the other two Horcruxes. So that's something that I don't think I haven't seen discussed anywhere before. But that's a very interesting take on it, and would be a great way to explain kind of the timeline there. Some people talk about the Elder Wand and having it, the fact that Grindelwald having it, why wasn't he able to defeat Albus in the duel before? You got to think about Voldemort duels. Why wasn't Albus able just to quickly defeat Voldemort whenever they, were battling it out? Specifically, book 5. In the book 5, they definitely have a good battle royale there. It's not like having that wand is just some sort of magic ingredient, for lack of a better term.
It's because that's a pretty terrible analogy.
Automatically win immediately because you have it, especially when you're talking about wizards of power like Voldemort and like Albus and Grindelwald. I mean, it's gives you an edge, I would think. But it's not like it's a slam dunk at that point just because you have the Elder Wand. So, I think that's kind of a way to fight back against the theory that, if Grindelwald had it, why didn't he just win? Well, you don't just win. I mean, that's just not, it's not that powerful of a wand.
Yeah. And the battle between Albus and Grindelwald, I think one of the major tenets of this theory is based on the fact that Albus really delayed in going to, confront Grindelwald because he didn't want to confirm that he was responsible for killing Ariana. And, the clearly obvious reason is he didn't want to take down his friend, his old crush or whatever. That's a pretty hard thing to get yourself up to. And we know that Albus is very ambitious on his own things and kind of wants to stay out of it a little bit, I think. And he only goes, in his own words, he only goes once he couldn't, in good conscience, ignore it any longer. But we also know that towards the end, Grindelwald had shown a lot of remorse for the things that he did, for which we don't have a whole lot of description of the terrible things that he's, had done at the time, outside of Fantastic Beasts and things like that. But there's a chance that whenever they did fight, Grindelwald didn't really fight back, almost. He very easily could have just kind of thrown in the towel because it was Albus. Maybe he did care for Albus in return and respected his opinion that it was kind of time to knock it off or whatever. But I don't know. It calls into question quite a few things, I think.
And I think that's something that, I might have even thought before this theory that, whenever Albus and Grindelwald are dueling, I don't feel like that duel has the same level of disdain as an Albus Voldemort duel. I mean, there's still residual feelings. There's still, blame over Ariana's death. There's so many complications to the relationship. And I think it would be foolish to say that the only reason Albus took so long to fight Grindelwald was because he thought it would prove that he killed Ariana. Okay. That's probably a piece of it. If we assume the theory is correct, that would be one small, maybe not small, but one piece of several pieces that would result in Dumbledore, trying to avoid that confrontation. So, I think it all factors in, but I think it does fit.
One of the other big questions I think it kind of raises is, what power does the Elder Wand really have? And you've kind of already touched on this a bit, but we don't know that it truly is that much better of a wand in general. It's all rumors. It's all guesswork by the people that follow it. It clearly you don't have to kill the person to gain the wand allegiance. It's almost like it's just another wand that's been put, this Hallows title on. I don't know. There's nothing confirming that it's really better than other wands, other than it is the Elder Wand, and people have put this label onto it that it is an unbeatable wand, which doesn't seem like that always holds up.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting concept to talk about. You do see a little bit of the power in that Harry is able to use it to repair his old wand.
That's true. That is
so
true.
There is a little bit of, okay, this is a little better than your run-of-the-mill everyday wand. As far as, in dueling situations, in power struggle type situations, like you were saying, and like I touched on earlier, it's not like it's blowing other people out of the water.
Right.
Is it an edge? Okay, maybe.
Right.
But you got to think, you think about Voldemort and Dumbledore's duel in the Ministry of Magic. If Dumbledore wasn't using that wand, do you really see that going down that much differently?
I don't. I think it would end up being almost exactly the same. And in that fight alone, I don't think, Dumbledore was fighting to kill. He wasn't dueling to kill. He was mostly just protecting Harry. And I think if he had decided to take Voldemort out permanently right there, maybe he could have. But I don't think, we already know in his previous dealing with Grindelwald, if we're going to assume, let's assume that they're very similar type battles. Maybe they do go all out against each other, Albus and Grindelwald, compared to what we saw with Albus and Voldemort. We know that Albus imprisoned Gellert Grindelwald at that time, so maybe he had no intent of killing him, but just imprisoning Voldemort at the time too. So maybe there is a difference of intent to kill with the Elder Wand as well.
Yeah, well, and I mean, at this point, obviously, Dumbledore knows he can't kill Voldemort anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
He's going to get rid of one body. I mean, it's like a video game at this point. It's like
he's got 7 lives.
Except it's unlimited lives still. I mean,
yeah. So
it's like you kill one body, but he already has a proven way to make a new body. You got to figure he's got supporters at this point. I mean, it's just there's really no true advantage to Dumbledore killing him at that particular period. Yeah. So, and that's a factor too, as well as the, taking Dumbledore's unwillingness to kill people in general. So, so where are we at? I mean, what are we?
I don't know. Can you think of any other? Let's see. I'm going to quickly read through this one more time, just the end part. I feel like we've touched on most of the supporting and conflicting information on it, on this theory.
Now, there's one I'm reading in the original Reddit thread, and we've sort of already hit on this, but not exactly this angle. There's a passage in the book where people that witnessed the duel between Albus and Grindelwald, the final duel in 1945, talking about how incredible it was, and then those same people say, if the Elder Wand already had allegiance to Dumbledore, then it shouldn't have been much of a duel. A simple disarming spell would have done it. That's what we saw at the end of the final book, where Harry, who supposedly is a much weaker wizard than Voldemort, easily captured the Elder Wand, or it wasn't really even a duel, it was barely a fight, because the Elder Wand owed its allegiance to Harry. And that's actually not a terrible point.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad point, but at the same time, I think we could follow up with, there's nothing saying that even though it was an incredible looking fight, that they almost weren't using that as a reunion, just like hey, let's do some really flashy, cool stuff to show off for one another. Dumbledore probably could have done the same thing that Harry did, sure, but why not have some fun while these two friends are back together again? It's the first time they've seen each other, and why not show off a bit?
Well, I don't know so much show off, but I mean, you see the same thing in Harry or in Dumbledore and Voldemort's battle in the Ministry. Is it really necessary for Dumbledore to be making stuff come and jump in front of spells and turning glass towards each other and water? I mean,
there are probably more direct ways of just getting the same thing accomplished without being flashy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes for obviously a great movie scene. And even a great book scene, but yeah.
It reminds me a lot of, when we talk about these wizarding fights, it reminds me a lot of the Disney Sword in the Stone, with Merlin and Morgana when they have their big fight at the end. It's just funny. They start turning into different animals, and it's very much not straightforward as to why they're doing it. It's just kind of silly. And I think with that mindset, it feels similar. There are a lot of similarities between that. It's maybe you have to do things that are odd like that to catch the other person by surprise, because they already know the whole book of dueling spells. They know the exact way to get around every defense and offensive move. So maybe there has to be these flashier, just not necessary types of magic being employed. And also for a stylistic thing from each wizard.
That's a good point. I like the taking them off guard, catching them off guard point. There's also the maybe arrogance plays a role as well, because Voldemort's coming into this with a ton of arrogance. There's no way he controls the wand. There's no way it could be loyal to somebody else. Maybe Grindelwald figured it out. Maybe he had a lot longer stretch of time to experiment with the wand. Realized that it wasn't really working for him like he expected.
Just like Voldemort did.
Right. Voldemort realized that, but maybe Grindelwald kind of took it farther and kind of figured out what really happened.
Like, how is this not mine?
You can take, to help counter the loyalty of the wand. Obviously, that's a question for someone in the Ollivander family tree. But maybe there's some steps that he took to help prevent that. It's not, I think it's again, a hole in the ship, but not sinking the ship. I like your metaphor.
All right. Well, I'm sure we can, as we go along through other episodes, we'll maybe retouch on some of these items and come back to it here and there. But for now, I think we've touched on most of the contradictions, holes in the ship. I still don't think any of them have fully sunk this theory. Do you know if J.K. Rowling has weighed in on this theory, or parts of it at least?
I haven't seen anything. I mean, I really haven't, kept up with her tweet stream to make sure that she hasn't. But, there's nothing that I've seen where she's weighed in.
Yeah, nothing pops up on a quick Google search on it that she's weighed in.
But again, I think we'll probably have more of these details revealed in the movies, the Fantastic Beasts movies, so I don't think she would want to. I mean, at this point, it seems like that would not make a whole lot of sense, because this will be confirmed or denied in the movies, I think, at least to some extent. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect to see anything.
Yeah, I agree. So, final thoughts on this. Do you think this is confirmed, plausible, busted?
I'm going with plausible. I still really like the theory. I still really think it just fits with, different theories in the Harry Potter books. So I'm going to stick with plausible. I think I might lower my likelihood to a 4, just because there is, we didn't sink the ship, but there's still a decent amount of holes in there.
It's still taking on water for you.
It's taken on a little more water than my initial read through, which is okay. It's still a wonderful theory, and I think it's a beautiful. I would almost say a beautiful theory to me.
It's neat.
Right, exactly. So anyway, that's where I'm at on it.
I'm pretty similar. I'm sticking with plausible, and I'm actually gonna bump mine up, my likelihood rating, to a 6. I feel like I had some questions going into this that during our discussion kind of made me think it's even more plausible. Maybe 6. Maybe I'll stick with a 5, but I'm going to stick with a 5 because there are some pretty big ones. But I anticipated that as we discussed it, I was going to drop my likelihood as well. But I feel like we've covered a lot of the questions on timeline, on Albus's knowledge and perception of the events that happened, and how he might not be the most reliable narrator at all times. So I'm going to stick with a 5 on likelihood here.
Yeah, and maybe we let our love for the theory get in our way of being completely objective on our likelihood scales. Maybe we just want it to be more likely than it is, but that's what happens.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right on that one, but
it's going to happen.
That's fair.
I definitely think we're probably trying to debunk the reasons the theory doesn't work, as opposed to trying to prove that it was false.
Yeah,
but I think we got there in the end. We kind of touched on everything. Anyway, we'd love to know what anyone else has to say about this. Obviously, there's the Reddit thread where we pulled a bunch of information out of, but definitely interested to hear what other people have to say about this theory. And, do you like it? Do you not like it?
Yeah, and do you see any other holes that do sink the ship? Definitely write in and let us know. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter at NoMugglesPod, or send us an email telling us what you agree with, tell us what you disagree with. Did we make too many logical jumps to kind of convince ourselves that we like the theory so much that it should be true, which is probably likely. But yeah, you can send us an email at nomugglespod@gmail.com telling us where we got mixed up. Magic is might. Stay imaginary.
George Weasley is Willy Wonka.
Okay. So
no.
Today's theme. No. You don't want to talk about it?
That's what I had to say. No.
So is Willy Wonka George Weasley?
No.
Your initial likelihood 1.
Are we going negative on likelihoods?
I guess on a scale of 1 to 7, the answer is no.
But, just initial likelihood, no.
So after reading the theory, what do you think now?
I'm gonna go with no.
I didn't. My vote didn't change. Oh man.
Willy Wonka.
All right, I think that's enough for now.